We're fortunate today to be able to interview John White, who, John, I think you're going to be in your 30th year as the head of uh, the Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Technologies next year. I think you were founded in 91. Um,
90, 91. I mean, it's sort of like it's all a haze at this point, but
yeah,
around that
really.
time.
Well, a solid record of accomplishment. Um, and, an incredible number of things that you've been involved in changing the clean energy and energy efficiency landscape in California. And it's really opened up a lot of opportunities for the small startups that we like to promote and help here at Clean Start. So there's always something crackling out there, something that's going to happen. Some of it's on the regulatory side, some of it's on the legislative side. But just to start, on the legislative side, I haven't seen that there's a big agenda pending before they close this year's session, August 31st. Is there anything out there that's still a big issue you're trying to push on before the legislature session ends?
Well, there's some leftover issues. There was a major effort to make a push for long duration storage and to have a mandatory procurement of some kind. And that was being pushed by labor, building and trades, and others, and NextEra, which has a big project down in Southern California that's already got a FERC license and all its permits. The problem with long duration storage is that it's simply bigger than almost any other load serving entity could buy or handle on its own. Plus the benefits are the system, not the individual utilities. So there's a lot of effort, a lot of social media, a lot of big push on that. So that bill looks like it's dead for the year, partly just because it's late. The other thing is that the legislature and the governor and everybody are very, very focused on a narrow range of options. There's focus on the virus, homelessness, and economic recovery. So the extent you can fit your argument or your idea into those frameworks, you have a shot. I'm working on a bill right now to create a blue ribbon commission on extraction of lithium from geothermal. It's not a very big deal, except that the bill is not a big deal, but the idea is a big deal, which is to see if we could extract lithium from geothermal brine and basically create a lithium industry in California.
Right.
Which is working on that. The Energy Commission has solicitation of projects and technologies that is on the street, and people have been funded. So I would keep my eye on lithium as a future industry in California. And the other thing that I think is happening that will amuse you, Gary, given your history, is that in California, it's the publicly owned utilities, LADWP and SMUD, that are starting to step out and be more aggressive than even state law is requiring. In any event, so you've now got a situation where under LA Mayor Eric Garcetti, they're plowing ahead with 100% clean energy by 2035. And for your members or your guys, I would keep my eye on LADWP's requests for information and requests for proposals. They're going to be going out in the fall with a series of solicitations for everything from feed-in tariff for commercial solar buildings to in-basin storage to transmission. So there will be procurement and projects coming out of LA. The technology that I think is underappreciated and undervalued that needs to get some, first of all, as Gary, we fall in love with one thing at a time in California and then do only that, right? So for a while it was combined cycles.
Right.
Those were going to be our future. That was the backbone of the system. So we built a fleet of combined cycles, and now we're running them at half or less speed. Okay.
Right.
We thought rooftop solar and batteries were the next best bet, and they are. They're going to be great, but they are not the only technologies that have value. And to me, what I would say to anybody that's getting into this business is that we've passed through the period where we're simply going to try to add renewables to the grid and prove that they're cheaper and cost effective and can be reliable. Okay, we've done that. And we've now got a situation where wind and solar and battery storage are cheaper than new gas for
Right.
energy applications. Okay, that's a huge thing. Okay, and I don't think the industry's got its head wrapped around what that means, because suddenly it's a commodity business now. It isn't all this sort of fancy entrepreneurial, power purchase hustlers. They're going to get blown away by people that are just, look at the bids you're seeing. You're seeing projects under 3 cents. And if you're trying to make money on a solar installation and you're under 3 cents, then, that's pretty tight. So to me, the technology that has not gotten enough attention is thermal energy storage.
Okay.
Ice energy. There was a company called Ice Bear.
It sort of disappeared.
Really big hopes for, and somebody ought to be picking them up, because the technology is fundamentally easy, right? I mean, all you're doing is freezing water and integrating it in with the HVAC system. And the whole point is you're shifting load, because here's the thing that has changed from when we all started. At the beginning, renewables were more expensive, in some cases significantly more expensive, than the average system costs. And so we wanted, originally, when we were doing the first stuff on renewables back in the Imbrecht era, we were talking about renewables for diversity, because we were getting so dependent on gas that we didn't really have a whole sophisticated global warming play. We were thinking, these are cleaner, so that's good from an air pollution standpoint, and they'll help us balance our dependence. Okay, but implicit in all of the policies that we launched was, let's not buy too much of this stuff too soon, because it'll raise rates. So the mindset was, how little can we get away with doing and still make this successful? Because the paramount need to protect rates is an imperative. So now we're in a situation where that impulse on the part of the regulators, particularly at the PUC, is, let's not buy too much too soon.
Right.
The paradigm is now flipped, because the other embedded assumption in that period is that load growth is flat. Has been from the beginning, since Charlie's days, right? No annual load growth compounding. And so therefore, that's another reason not to buy too much too soon, because you're not have too much load growth. Well, now we're in a situation where load growth is starting to ramp up with buildings and transportation.
Right.
And the cost of the renewables is less. So now the danger is you're not buying enough soon enough.
Right.
And this is not something that it's counterintuitive to the way the regulators have been thinking about. Well, now the other part of this is that we've assumed that gas is cheap. And we've assumed that gas is the default for reliability. So we may have won the argument with coal, we may have won the argument with gas for energy, but gas for reliability, we haven't won yet. And this is where I think there's room for some real important innovations. And yet it requires us to figure some things out. So the way we typically evaluate resources for capacity is their ELCC, the carrying capacity, or the capacity that you could assume for that resource.
Right.
But when you have portfolios of resources that individually have an NQC or an ELCC, first of all, you may not calculate that correctly if you do it in isolation. Because in effect, what these resources are going to do is, and I didn't stay for the whole thing, but I was very impressed with the presentation from one of your guys that was doing this, the used batteries for storage.
Yeah, repurpose energy.
BMW has been talking about that for 10 years, and that's a brilliant application. Now, I don't know how you figure out the warranties and all that,
all that.
The thing, what that project tells me is that you guys are already thinking the right way about attributes that the system needs. Okay,
Right.
the system doesn't just need kilowatt hours. Okay, that's the easy part. Okay,
Right.
what the system needs is local capacity, system capacity, attributes that we don't normally think of when we think about clean energy, but we have to be able to basically replicate the services that the gas system now supplies. And to do that, we got to be able to count what these resources do for reliability. And if we can count them, then we can get them paid.
Right. Well,
they can't get paid, then there's no point.
right.
But the problem is the grid operators don't have experience with running the grid. And that if you're in the control room up in Folsom, you're not interested in being experimental. You're not interested in gambling, because if anything goes wrong on your shift, it's your ass.
Right.
Right. And so the guys in the control room are not our enemies. They're just the audience. And so what we've been arguing about, and we've got some help from Edison in terms of, is that because the PUC has dilly-dallied for the last 10 years, suddenly we've got a capacity crunch, right? We got a capacity crunch because we're losing imports from the coal retirements, because the gas plants can't be relied upon to stay online if they're not making money. And so we've had some early retirements of stuff like Sutter, or other projects where you got relatively new plants that can't make money, and so they're shutting down. And so,
right.
so that collective set of facts caused the PUC to suddenly say, "Uh-oh, we got a problem. So we're going to go do a solicitation, and we're going to go to the water board and beg on our knees to extend the OTC deadlines for the once-through cooling plants, even though they've had 9 years to prepare." So we've got a capacity crunch and procurement coming. But if the counting rules aren't in place, then our stuff won't get to participate. And the whole idea we have is to start with interim counting rules that are subject to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's going to say that we have the answer. But we can, we're giving people money for SGIP, right? So stuff must be worth something, right? Or
Right.
we wouldn't be subsidizing, right? But you've got facilities that are eligible to get money for SGIP but don't count for reliability. Well, that's not good, right? So our idea is, let's adopt some interim count. And I'm sorry to get it off in the weeds, but this is important for what you guys are doing. So we have been working at the PUC to try to get interim in with the ISO. And I have to say the ISO management is open to all this, because they know that we are going to at some point not be able to have gas as the base of the reliability of the system. And so they are wanting to learn. And so the idea is, let's get experience with this procurement and find out how this stuff works. And then we'll think about whether do the counting rules work, or we got to go make some adjustments. But the idea is that if we can qualify these resources to provide reliability, then we open up that market to these technologies. And so I think, to sort of summarize, we, just like with renewables, we promoted renewables for the sake of renewables. We've done the same with distributed resources. We want to promote them because we want them. But the challenge is, okay, having started down this path, can we put these resources to doing the work of the grid and not just have them be spectators or, free riders, or, we're watching what y'all are doing, but the real men balance the grid with gas. Well, and this isn't just about renewables. This is also about state water projects. So I've got another project that I've been working on, and I was just trying to fundraise off of, which is to basically recognize that the state water project, dams and reservoirs, are a resource that we could put to work. However, back in the day when we had the whole nightmare of the collapse of the wholesale market, everybody got spooked about withholding. And the ISO developed protocols and standards that basically said you got to have a must offer obligation a year ahead to participate in resource adequacy. And well, nobody in the hydro world is going to give you a year ahead commitment for anything. And these are what you call multi-use facilities. So these are facilities that have other purposes, just like demand response. The businesses that are participating in demand response are not in business to do demand response, but if you can make them some money, they'll do it. And so our idea is for the ISO to kind of get a little more creative in how they value and assess these resources. They have had some good conversations with Bonneville, which is why Elliot Mainzer's arrival is likely to enable further innovation in this regard. So I would say that the barriers to entry to new products, services, and technologies, the likes of which your folks are able to develop, is going to depend on getting the rules right and creating a space for innovation. So that even if we haven't figured everything out, we can start trying and practicing and doing some stuff. So for example, Edison is not comfortable with behind the meter storage counting, because they're not sure that you've already counted it in the load forecast and this, but all this has implications for how we do load forecasts too. Okay? So as much as I am limited in my knowledge about all this, I am blessed to be presiding over a team of people that are doing some of that innovation, and companies too. You know, there's a lot of bigger companies that are looking to do new things. You know, NextEra's got a 20 megawatt solar electrolyzer making hydrogen down in Florida. So I think that's the other thing, is electrolyzer technology using surplus renewables to make hydrogen has some potential if we can figure out how to do the capital costs. You know? And then there's people like Enel, which is an Italian firm that is doing everything from battery storage to electric vehicle charging. But I think services and to provide grid reliability is going to be something that I don't know how soon we'll be able to put it together, but I think this is at least what we're working on.
Well, I mean, I think that's all very central to some things that companies are working on right now. You mentioned Ice Bear. We do have a company in the community here that essentially puts a thermal battery in the HVAC system to freeze a phase change material when electricity is cheap, and then use it at peak times when the air conditioning is used in order to cut back on peak electricity demand, as well as save money for the customer. But you know, a lot of the characteristics of small companies that work on the demand response side is what you said. They're not in the business of doing demand response. In the case of the company I'm talking about, it's called Stasis Group. They're in the business of saving individual buildings money and keeping them comfortable. But yet there are all sorts of incentives and even surrendering some control that would make installations like that much more firm to be used against resource adequacy or
well, you touched on something that's very important, is that, you know, you incent people, or you pay people to do what you want them to do, right?
Right.
And in some cases, we said we want you put in storage. So they did. But how you use the storage, whether the storage actually going to be used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or reduce gas, as opposed to reduce demand charges, depends on how you set up the incentives. Susan Kennedy's business, Advanced Micro Devices, is basically using batteries to shift load out of the time when you trigger demand charges and higher rates. So you basically use storage to shift rates, and that ought to tell us that load shifting, I mean, the other thing, I think two phrases that I think we need to retire and reinvent. One is time of use pricing.
Right.
Which suggests we're going to make you pay through the nose on the hot summer afternoon and, discourage your use, when in fact what we're going to want to do is move load all around at different times of day, different times of year, doing different things, which means making the load more mobile, which is not something that we've really imagined. We think of demand response, and part of the reason that we have half the demand response that we used to have 5 years ago is because demand response got jacketed as like a subsidy for big customers that didn't do anything, And so, the demand response industry has basically been, if not driven out of California, has at least had thumb on the scale to make it really hard to do business here, even though demand response is one of the technologies or load mobility that is absolutely crucial to our success. So I really fault what I'm calling a regulatory fatigue or a lack of regulatory innovation. I feel like the technology and economics of the stuff that we're talking about here is good and getting better.
Yeah, no, I agree with
but
that.
Our regulatory framework and our ability to imagine where we're going as opposed to where we've been is a real problem.
In your topic of reimagining what could be done, I think it's sort of useful to just sort of forget about how we did it before and come up with a new set of requirements that technology enables us to do now and have another go at it. But it's silly to treat demand as something over which you have no control.
Exactly. Well, and it's particularly the case now where there is such huge variations in the cost of electricity at different times of the day at different locations. I mean, it's the idea that the load is fixed and the generation moves to where the load is, we're turning that upside down. And the generation that's available to us, that's free or cheap or inexpensive, is coming at these times. That's when we want to migrate our use to.
Right.
And it's that's why I think we need a different term than demand response, because demand response has come to mean paying big customers to drop load when you think you need it, and that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I think it's all a part of a subset of the whole reimagining of the utility, and you've talked about this too, where the utility may become, the manager of thousands of microgrids, rather than the centralized power plants, transmission lines, and a tree branch-like system of distribution that flows only one direction. And we're slowly moving in that direction. I think, maybe comment on this too. The CCAs, the community power organizations that have popped up, they're taking more and more of a role in trying to see how this thing would be reimagined. But, they don't have the heft, they don't have the cash flow to do a lot of experimentation yet. A lot of them are pretty open.
No, we actually see that. The disaggregation of the utility load to the CCAs has been a nightmare in terms of procurement, because the utilities are now long on everything and don't need to do anything, and they're selling stuff. And the CCAs have some of the attributes of direct access customers where you kind of want to slap them around a little bit. But I would say that the difference between them and direct access customers is that their motivation is different.
Right.
cheaper is if you can, but cheaper isn't the reason for what they're doing. And so we, on resource adequacy, which is where we see where all the gas plant emissions are, we think the kinds of resources that the CCAs could help us assemble in their local communities, they can go find the load shifting customers and places where we could combine storage with local solar. And, the guys down at the East Bay CCA and PG&E did sort of a good job, although PG&E screwed the money up and grabbed too much of it. But the idea is to basically shut down that peaker at Jack London Square and replace it with a big battery and a solar project. And, that's the kind of stuff that the CCAs are motivated to help us do. And so our idea, the trick here is, can we create a bridge between the third-party aggregators and the CCAs and the ISO, right? Because the ISO is going to have trouble if the scheduling and the dispatch of this is all spread to hell and gone. So we've been thinking about this idea that Lorenzo Christoph has put forward of a distribution system utility, where a distribution system operator, where you would basically have the utility be indifferent to which resources, and Edison has at least expressed the willingness to consider acting in that role as sort of like doing the schedule and the dispatch of the third-party resources. We don't have a complete agreement, but see, and the reason for their willingness is because of how much volatility they've been having to eat on the gas side.
Sure.
Right? I mean, everybody acts, this is part of our story that we hope to tell about the gas, true cost of gas. But if you look at Southern California and those, Swiss cheese pipelines plus Aliso Canyon, I mean, it's been $1 billion a year of extra money from the gas system that's flowed straight through the power system. So Edison, we think, is more, I mean, it's still, I get used to the idea of them as our allies, but they're closer to being innovators on this than anybody else. And we see them, I mean, our thing is, let's practice. Let's see how this works. We don't have to commit to doing this 100% forever, but let's get out there in the field. And that's why I was particularly impressed with, your guys that were basically figuring out how to get access to some old batteries and how to deploy them. And, that's what we need.
Yeah, well, they're very creative and they're doing well. Let me ask you another variation on a theme. I mean, your building decarbonization project, other people's electrification of buildings, I mean, play that out and we're looking at having to pay for the whole gas system as being a stranded asset.
Yes, and this is...
But, I mean, there are places now that have got the point that you could do the variation of a resource portfolio standard for the gas system by introducing renewable gas. And there are places that have that, like I call it directed gas, just like it's directed customers.
Yeah, except that it ends up being too much like a wreck, okay? And I mean, I've worked on methane recovery legislation, and I'm well aware of the importance of recovering methane. But the problem is that SoCalGas is attempting to stave off the building decarbonization by saying renewable natural gas will get us everything we need without doing that. And the problem I see is that renewable natural gas has a limited volume, maybe 5 to 10% of the total. And the way the economics are skewed at the moment is that ARB, to lubricate the cap and trade system, allowed directed biogas that got put in a pipeline in Ohio or Texas to count the same as if that biogas was produced and collected in California. And that's that's a problem. But I mean, directed biogas and renewable natural gas, particularly with fuel cells to make hydrogen and other, I mean, it's a part. But the building decarb stuff is interesting to me that, we're fiscal sponsors for that project. And I've been surprised at how much traction they've got.
Yeah, well,
the
I'm
local-
just to put a thought in your ear. What's wrong with putting renewable hydrogen into the gas system? If you put 25% hydrogen in the gas system, it works about the same as the way it does right now.
Yeah, I think renewable hydrogen. I'm hesitate to. It could be a little bit like fusion, or fuel cells, where it's just around the corner for the next 10 years forever.
Right.
But I mean, the fact that NextEra decided to build a renewable electrolyzer with only solar tells me, and I'm just hearing from people that they're looking at it. And if you think about it, okay, you're a developer with solar experience. The power purchase agreement, if you can get one, is going to be 2 cents or below, depending on how much batteries you have.
Right.
That's a pretty thin margin.
Right.
You
You got to think of something else to do with that power.
So then the question is, okay, if you have an off-taker that's willing to give you a 15-year contract at 3 cents. Now the question, I'm actually working with Sacramento Air District on a project that we have hopes of getting funded at the Energy Commission, where we're trying to involve SMUD, because SMUD could decide to price power competitively if they wanted the project. They have economic development rates. Whereas I go to San Francisco, the PUC, I'll never come home for 3 years. But between the Riverside Municipal Utility down at Riverside and the SMUD in Sacramento, if a municipal utility was the partner, then you could really get a little closer on the economics. But from what I've learned about electrolyzers, you're going to need almost as much money to deliver the power as to buy it, because you're going to need to have a substation and stuff. So this may be a little far out, but as I'm sure you can agree from the time you've been working on this, you never know about some of this stuff,
No, and one of the big surprises, I think, for everybody is how fast the cost of batteries has been coming down.
Yes.
And MIT did this big study that said, well, lithium ion batteries will never be good for large scale storage because they just cost too much. Yeah. And now at the cutting edge, the batteries are 1/10 the cost of what MIT was talking about. So you never know. So it's just.
Yeah. And that's why it's important that we not fall into complacency about thinking we figured all this out. And this is why the term regulatory innovation has come to mind, because private sector kind of knows what to do, but public sector sometimes doesn't know how to change.
Right. Yeah. Looking at it in old ways.
Yeah.
Well, we've taken up a lot of your time. I know you got a board meeting coming up. We may do one of these again in the future, but this has been.
I would be happy to, Gary. I appreciate you reaching out. I appreciate you doing this and keeping me posted. I want to not lose my connection to the up and coming, so I appreciate you keeping me posted.